Now that we have our registry, our gateway, and our microservice in place, it's time to start building out some functionality for our conference application. To do so, we're going to build out our data model for that particular microservice. And to do that, we're going to use the JDL Studio. So we've already looked at the JDL Studio in this course, so you should be pretty familiar with it at this point. We're going to use it to create a very simple data model for our conference microservice. So let's get started. So first off, we're going to create an entity called speaker. And in this speaker entity, we're going to have our first name, which is a string, and it is required. We're going to have a last name, which is a string and is required. We're going to have an email, which is a string and also required. We're going to have a Twitter handle, so that will be a string required. And we'll have a bio, and that's going to be a string and be required as well. So that's basically what our speaker looks like. That'll give us some information about who the speaker is. So once we have speaker information, we need to start setting up session information. So we'll create a new entity called session. And this is going to have a title. We're going to have a description about what the session is going to be all about. We're going to have a start, date, time. That's going to be a zoned date time. We're going to have a end date time. And that's also going to be a zoned date time and required. Just looking at this domain, and I'm thinking about something here. So I'm going to jump back to the JHipster domain language documentation, and I'm going to look at some different types here. And I can see down here, so this is why I use zone date time and not something else, and because these are the types that the JDL Studio supports. So I'm actually going to change a couple things. I want a blob for a few of these. So for my bio, I'm going to want a blob. And for my description of the session, I think I'm also going to want a blob. So I'm going to change those up. And last but not least, I'm going to add a relationship here. So relationship, we're going to say this is a many-to-many because many sessions can belong to the same speaker and one speaker can belong to many sessions. So this is how we're going to set this up. We're going to say speaker has sessions to session speakers. That should be correct. I think that'll work. So I want to jump back to the documentation one more time, and there's also something in here for microservice related. So we're only building one microservice here, but this may be a good pattern to follow. When we're building microservices, we can actually define what microservice this particular data model is using. So we can do something like this. And if we go back over to JDL Studio, we can say microservice, all of these particular entities are going to belong to our conference microservice. So again, not a big deal when you only have one, but when we go to add a new domain model, so let's say later in this section, you're going to actually build out your own one. Maybe that uses a different database. Maybe that uses, say, MongoDB. How does JDL know? Well, this is how it actually separates that out. So you can leave that if you want. I'm not going to. This is kind of what it looks like. I've already downloaded this into our application. So what I did is I created a folder underneath source main resources, and I created a new folder called JDL, and I saved this into it. So you'll want to do the same. I think I called mine conference-JDL. Make sure you have that .jh on the end of it. If you don't, when you go to import it, you will get an error. So just make sure you have that in there. So with that in place, in both our gateway and our conference microservice, it's time to import those. So here we are in our gateway. Let me just double check. Yes, that's where we are. So we're just going to run jhipster import JDL, and we're going to point to that particular jhipster JDL studio file that we just downloaded. So again, I put mine in source, main resources, created a new folder called JDL, and there it is. So once we do that, we're doing this on the gateway side. So if you look at what was generated, we have some liquid base information there. I'm sorry, are we in the gateway? Yes, we are. All right, so here is our, let me just double check this. Okay, so sorry about that. So basically what we are doing here is this is in the gateway side. So you'll see all of the Angular dependencies or Angular UI stuff generated out. So this only happens in the gateway, obviously. When we're over in the conference microservice app, you won't see any of the UI stuff generated. But at least here we have all of our web app stuff. So we're generating the front end of this application based on that data model. Now the downside to this is because we're running this in two places, if we do have a change to that data model, you'll need to run that in both the conference app and the gateway app. Okay, so everything was done in the gateway app, so we can go ahead and run that. And now let's go back over to our conference application, and we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to run jhipster import JDL, source main resources JDL, and the only one in there. And now this time when we generate everything, we're going to go ahead and just generate the backend stuff that we need. So you'll see in here we have like our domain object, our repository, our REST resources, etc. So this didn't generate everything. It knows that this is a microservice application and it only needs to generate that side of things. So let's go ahead and run that again as well. And when everything is up and running, we'll go back and visit our application at localhost 8080 and see our new entities in our application. All right, so now all of our applications are back up and running. We're going to come back over here and we're going to go to localhost 8080. And this should bring up our gateway application. And there it is. And we're logged in still, so we can go over to entities, and you'll see now that we have our speaker and our session. So we have both the front end pieces that make filling out this information, and then we have the conference microservice that holds our Java classes, our backend classes, to be able to save these resources. So let's go in and create a new speaker. And we'll say Dan Vega, the real Dan Vega. And we have no sessions at this point, so I'm just going to go ahead and save this. And a new speaker was created with identifier 1. Now we can go into a session. We can create a new session. Spring Boot 2.0. And then this front end was generated for us because of the type that we gave it. Remember, we stated that it was a zoned date and time. So now we have this nice calendar picker that we can pick from. And we can just come in here and say 10 o'clock a.m. And we can go ahead and pick the 30th again and say 10:30 a.m. And we can go ahead and save this. So now we can also go back into our speaker, edit our speaker, and say that is our session. So now that one doesn't make a lot of sense. And again, this is just getting us, so far. We are going to have to write and edit some code. So we could easily go into the Angular application and change where this display is. Instead of showing a number or an ID, we can show the speaker's first and last name. So that's kind of it for our data model. Again, we've got this working on both our conference app and our gateway app. And what we would do from here is probably just keep working on the front end here and make some changes, get this app kind of up to what we need it to be. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to run this application, some things that we're going to run into, and just kind of close this piece out. So let's go ahead and stop this here. And in the next lesson, we'll talk about running this application and some of the different challenges we might face and how we might solve them.